Matthew chapter 23, verses 1 through 24. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, whatever they tell you, do and comply with it all. But do not do as they do. For they say things and do not do them. And they tie up heavy burdens and lay them on the people's shoulders. But they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. And they do all their deeds to be noticed by others. For they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. And they love the place of honor at banquets and the seats of honor in the synagogues and personal greetings in the marketplace and being called rabbi by the people. But as for you, do not be called rabbi, for there is only one teacher, and you are all brothers and sisters. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for only one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called leaders, for only one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest of you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut the kingdom of heaven in front of people, and you do not go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel around on sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, that is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools, you blind men, which is more important, the gold or the temple that sanctified the gold? And you say, whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing. But whoever swears by the offering that is on it is obligated? You blind men, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the offering? Therefore, the one who swears by the altar swears by both the altar and everything on it. Whoever swears by the temple swears by both the temple and by him who dwells in it. And the one who swears by heaven swears both by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Gomer is standing in the middle of the town square, about to be auctioned off as a slave. She has a husband at home who loves her, even though he knew who she was. She was a prostitute and sexually unclean when he married her, but he did it anyways. And all throughout their marriage, Gomer remained unfaithful. And eventually, the debt which she built with one of her lovers was so great, he decided to call it in. And she became his slave. And now he was selling her off. She looks around the crowd of the slave auction, seeing people who knew her husband. And they whispered to each other, talked about her to each other. And she thought, why am I not at home with a husband who loved me and my beautiful children? He is surely going to divorce me for this. And as she thought about that, a tear goes down her face, thinking of that she will never see her husband or children ever again. But she quickly wipes it, forces her face into a smile, preparing herself for her next master. And the slave owner calls her up to stand on the slave block. As the sun's beaming down and morning turns to noon, and her master calls out, bidding starts at 30 shekels. And immediately from the back, someone says, here. And Gomer thinks she recognizes the voice. But she says, no, it can't be. Now, Gomer doesn't have the face she once did. A face once smooth and beautiful, now worn. A body once tender, now used and abused. And no one else offers a bid. The slave owner waits a few more moments as Gomer is shifting on the block, trying to see the man who put the only bid for her. And the slave owner finally calls it and says to the gentleman in the back, come get your prize. And a man starts parting the crowd. And immediately, Gomer falls on her knees and weeps, for Hosea, her husband, has bought her back. Hosea goes to the slave owner, gives him 15 shekels and a homer and lethech of wheat, which is worth 15 shekels. Hosea embraces Gomer, and as they embrace, says in her ear, for you shall not play the prostitute, and you shall be with no other man, but shall remain with me for many days, and walks her home as his wife. The marriage covenant was broken. Hosea had every excuse to abandon her on that slave block that day. But they stayed married. The covenant remained. Not because Gomer was faithful, but because he is. Marriage and our relationship with God is a yoke. We do bear a responsibility. But the difference is, a yoke of our own making, that's unbearable. That's heavy. But when we live in a relationship as God intended it, that yoke is easy. And what grace is God taking off the yoke we made and placing on our shoulders His. Israel's leaders have been walked home many times out of their shame, out of their regret, from them selling themselves into slavery for the debts they accumulated. God showed up for them every time. And yet again, Israel's leaders have left God's home. And now the Pharisees stand looking at God Himself in the temple, arms crossed with a scowl, because somehow this rabbi has convinced the masses that he's legitimate. Jesus has just once again outwitted the Pharisees, has once again made them stuck and caught them in their own words. And as the Pharisees sulk back into the crowd, defeated, and now tension between the religious leaders of Israel and Jesus is at breaking point. Instead of Jesus trying to calm the tensions, instead of Jesus trying to smooth things out, he kicks over the cistern of wrath here and goes right at him. And Jesus opens up saying, "You scribes and Pharisees, you sit in the seat of Moses, teaching the covenant of God. Therefore, do as they say. But do not do as they do. For they teach the law, but they themselves live above it. They don't practice what they preach." And a hush falls over the crowd. The Pharisees remain paralyzed in stone-cold fury. And he continues that even though we are under Rome's burden, you yourselves don't lift a finger to help us relieve the burden you yourselves have placed on us. Rather than making life easier in your role, you bear us down with more things, with more worries, with more burdens. And we've all experienced that Pharisee. Even at times we've been that Pharisee. When we say, they just need to be more faithful. They just need to be more devoted. They don't really mean it. They're just abusing my grace. Why do we receive this gift of life freely, but then raise the bar for others? Because this is what Hosea heard when he was walking down the aisle to redeem his wife. I can't believe he's giving her another chance. She's just going to do it again. But Hosea showed up anyways, through the crowd, and redeemed his life, releasing her from the burden of slavery which she put herself in, and bringing her in to his home yet again. And now, God himself is standing in the temple of his faithless people and names where this impulse to raise the bar of something we receive freely comes from. Jesus continues. Everything you do, scribes and Pharisees, is a performance. It's theater. You're play acting religion. You lengthen the little boxes on your robes of scriptures, and you lengthen the tassels at the bottom of your garments. You conveniently enforce a law which puts you in the place of honor. Conveniently, you enforce a law that gives you the best seats at tables in synagogues, and that gives you fancy titles as rabbi. But there is only one teacher, for you are all brothers. You like being called Father? We only have one Father, He who is in heaven. You want to be called leader? We only have one leader, Christ. So the greatest of you shall be a servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled. Whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. as the Pharisees gave themselves special spots at the table, we ask in return at times a favor from the people we serve. Maybe even unintentionally. It still rests beneath the surface. That we request those which we serve to do things first our way. Come to our church. Do our thing. And then we will serve you. A life in which we receive freely. We start raising the bar. But why? And the questions we ask after we do serve someone, we're not asking about how that may have changed their life, but we're asking, why didn't they show up to church the next Sunday? And it's because they feel the strings. They feel the yoke. Not of God's beautiful grace, but of works and performance. We unintentionally wear and want them to wear as well. Our yoke, when doing this, steers people away from God rather than to Him. What Jesus calls us to do is serve without a return address on the gift. And when we seek His recognition, when we seek His glory, when we live to only exalt His name, He exalts us. And we live primarily to lay down our lives before Him. He raises us up. And Jesus is about to show us what this looks like. And it cost us everything. Now here Jesus' body's language shifts. He goes from being a prophet, condemning and challenging Israel, to a man of mourning, a prophet mourning over God's people. He goes from shoulders squared to the crowd, eyes full of fire, to his eyes becoming watery, his body as if he is holding up something heavy, his shoulders falling. And says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you blind guides, shutting the doors of the kingdom for others, and even more so for yourselves. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You cross land and sea for one convert, yet they become twice the child of hell as yourself. For you say, if one swears by the temple, it means nothing. But when one swears by the gold that's in the temple, that's binding? What's more important? The temple, which sanctified the gold, or just the gold? You say, if one swears by the altar, that means nothing. But if you swear But the offering on the temple, on the altar, that's what's binding? And as Jesus is saying this, an old, elderly widow enters the temple slowly. And when Jesus sees her, he stops for a moment. His jaw clenches and continues. The oath which you make, you may know. But the widow and the farmer, you abuse their ignorance of all these rules. You tithe mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier things of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You blind guides, strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. When Jesus ends this teaching, he gets his disciples together and goes to the treasury and sits across from it. And that elderly widow walking with a limp into the temple goes to it. And Jesus gets his disciples and says, watch this, watch this. And this widow pulls out 2 coins, her last 2 coins, and places them in the treasury. And Jesus says, she just gave more than all the rest of them. She gave to a treasury in which the Pharisees used to fund their lavish lifestyles, that they get to abuse the treasury, while it is putting the widows, the farmers, the orphans, they're giving all they have. And while that widow's offering looked small compared to the large ones the Pharisees flaunt around, the Pharisees, they're the ones that are burdened. They're the ones walking around with that heavy yoke on their shoulders. While the woman, even though giving everything she had, even though it was small, walks away free. So are you tithing dill and cumin? Or are you giving your last coins? Are you living by the rules, but not in genuine surrender? And here's how to tell. If you feel as your relationship with God doesn't lift your burdens, then you're probably living under the yoke of your own making. But if your relationship with God feels easy and light, and that it actually drives you forward in life, then that's the easy yoke of Christ. Gomer was given undeserved freedom. She was not a virgin, yet Hosea married her anyways. That she was given the status of wife, yet ran back to the streets and lived as a prostitute. And look where that got her. Why do we make the same mistake? Given access to the freedom and status as Christ's bride, but continually run back to old lovers, of self-reliance and self-righteousness? And that's a question I have to ask myself every single day. Because that's my struggle. That's my burden. That's my thorn in the side that I continually have to be careful of. I remember I was talking to a pastor earlier this week. And he stops me mid-sentence and says, I hear some animosity in your voice. What's that all about? I freeze. Because I know he's right. And I sat there for a moment in silence, searching. Well, I had this just, one of those feelings, you don't know where it comes from, but it's just a resentment, a bitterness that's kind of built up in you, and you have to take a moment. I realize it's because I didn't feel seen. Because that's what self-righteousness does. It makes you the center of attention. It makes you have that desire to be seen. It's why we lift the bar. Because then everyone that comes through the gate, everyone that we interact with, feels like they live up to our standards. We feel in control. If we're not careful, faith turned inward can be the reason in which we put back on that yoke, that burden of the law, of self-righteousness, of self-reliance. And what I have to tell myself, how I get through this battle with the desiring to put back on the old yoke of self-performance and reliance, is it's not about me. Pick up the cross and follow him. Letting go of our life as he let go of his. Let me say that again. If we are to find this freedom, if we are to be relieved of this burden, we need to put our focus back on the one who gave us life. Letting go of our life as he let go of his. The one who calls us to bear one another's burdens is the same one who first bore our burden. He who never fell under sin's power willingly submitted to it and entered it so that he could break its hold on us forevermore, fulfilling every requirement to bring us home, to walk us home as his bride in full freedom with the full rights of the bride of Christ. So are you filtering out gnats to swallow camels? Are you filtering out and tithing the cumin and the dill, but forgetting the weightier portions of the law? The same one who said, "Come to me, all who are heavy laden and burdened, and I will give you rest," is the same one who then turns us outward and says, now go into the world and bear with them. As we did this week, locking arms with people we have never met and bearing their burden of loss. That is what Christ sends us out to do each and every day, now that we've been